In the heart of Amaya village, tales of spirits and magic flowed like the river beneath the ancient baobab tree. Grandmother Sophia always warned, never leave your shoes outside at night. Spirits walk the earth when the moon is high. David and his younger sister, Juliet, never believed her. To them, the stories were just old people's talk. But grandmother's voice would turn serious, her eyes narrowing as she added, if the spirits take your shoes, you will walk their path forever. One evening, David ran inside, too tired to remember his dusty sandals by the doorstep. Juliet noticed but giggled, maybe the spirits will take you tonight. David laughed, brushing off her words. Yet, as the moon climbed higher, a soft rustling came from outside. It was as if something was moving near the sandals. Neither of them knew this would be the start of an unforgettable adventure. The morning sun painted the sky in shades of gold. David rushed outside, ready to play with his friends, but his sandals were gone. He searched everywhere, behind the pots, under the bench, even near the bushes. Juliet, did you hide my shoes? He asked, frustration in his voice. But Juliet shook her head, her face serious. I told you. The spirits must have taken them. David felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered Grandmother Sophia's warning. Yet, he refused to believe in spirits. Maybe a dog took them, he said aloud, more to convince himself than Juliet. But the ground was untouched, no paw prints, no trail. Just the empty space where his sandals once lay. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of a nightmarish mystery. Worried and confused, David ran to Grandmother Sophia. Grandma, my sandals are gone. I left them outside last night. Her eyes darkened, and she sighed, I warned you, David. The spirits must be playing. Juliet shivered, standing close to David. But, they're just stories, right? She whispered. Grandmother leaned closer, her voice low. Long ago, in this very village, a boy left his shoes outside. The spirits took them. When he followed the footprints, he was never seen again. David's heart raced. Footprints? He asked. Grandmother nodded. Yes. Tiny, twisted footprints leading deep into the forest. David's eyes widened. If his sandals were truly taken by spirits, then the footprints could still be out there, waiting to be followed. Determined to find his sandals, David decided to look around once more. Come on, Juliet. Let's find those footprints, he said, trying to sound brave. Together, they searched near the doorstep. That's when Juliet gasped, pointing at the ground. Faint but clear, tiny twisted footprints led away from the house, toward the dense forest. The prints were unlike anything they had seen before. Small and crooked, almost as if the feet were twisted in pain. David's heart pounded. He wanted to turn back, but his sandals were his only pair. We have to follow them, he whispered, his voice trembling. Juliet clutched his arm tightly, her eyes wide with fear. The forest loomed ahead, its shadows dancing under the morning sun, inviting them to step inside. The forest was darker than they imagined. Tall trees stretched high, their branches like crooked arms, blocking the sunlight. Every step they took, the twisted footprints seemed to multiply, weaving deeper into the shadows. Are you sure about this? Juliet's voice was barely a whisper. David tried to sound confident. We'll just follow the footprints and find my sandals. Then we'll come back. But even he didn't believe his own words. The air grew colder, and strange whispers floated around them. It sounded like laughter, soft and mocking. David tightened his grip on Juliet's hand. They walked for what felt like hours, the trees bending closer as if listening to their every step. Then, they heard it, the faint sound of footsteps ahead, dragging slowly, unevenly. Someone, or something, was leading them further into the darkness. A figure appeared in the distance, small and hunched, moving awkwardly as if its legs were twisted. It wore what looked like old, tattered clothes, dragging its feet through the leaves. David's heart skipped a beat. The figure was wearing his sandals. "Hey! Those are mine!" he shouted before he could stop himself. The figure paused, its head slowly turning. Eyes like burning coals glowed from the shadows. Juliet gasped, clinging to David. The creature's mouth opened in a crooked smile, revealing sharp, uneven teeth. It pointed a bony finger at them and then laughed, a high-pitched, echoing sound that chilled them to the bone. It turned and hobbled deeper into the forest, its twisted footprints marking the way. "David, let's go back," Juliet pleaded, but David shook his head. "We have to get my sandals, or we might never leave this forest." As they followed the twisted footprints, the forest grew even darker. The trees leaned in, their branches creaking like old bones. David heard whispers coming from the leaves. "Shoes, shoes, foolish children." The voices seemed to giggle, mocking them. Juliet covered her ears. "Stop it. Stop listening to them." But the whispers grew louder. David glanced at the trees. Their bark looked like faces, ancient and wrinkled, eyes watching their every move. One tree even seemed to smile, its twisted branches curling like fingers. Juliet's eyes were wide with fear. "The forest, it's alive!" she cried. David wanted to turn back, but the footprints were still there, leading them deeper. He had to get his sandals back, or he knew they would never escape the forest's twisted shadows. Suddenly, a loud caw echoed above them. A large black crow swooped down, landing on a low branch. Its eyes gleamed with curiosity. "Shoes, silly boy lost his shoes," it croaked, its voice raspy but clear. David's mouth dropped open. You can talk." The crow tilted its head, its beak twisting into what looked like a grin. "Everything talks in the spirit's forest." Juliet shivered, stepping closer to David. "Do you know who took my sandals?" David asked, trying to sound brave. The crow's eyes sparkled mischievously. "Oh, yes. The twisted one took them. He loves shoes, loves to play tricks." David's heart raced. "Where did he go?" The crow pointed its wing further into the shadows. "Follow the footprints, but be careful. Not all who enter this forest find their way back." Then, with another loud caw, the crow flew away, leaving them alone once more. David and Juliet followed the footprints deeper into the forest. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into faint echoes, repeating their words in mocking tones. "Foolish boy. Silly girl. Lost forever." Juliet squeezed David's hand tighter, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't like this place, David. It's cursed." David nodded, but his determination burned brighter. He wouldn't leave without his sandals. They followed the twisted footprints to a clearing where the echoes grew louder, swirling around them like a fierce wind. "Leave, or stay, forever," the voices chanted. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, and for a moment, David felt dizzy. Then, the shadows moved, forming shapes that danced and laughed, their faces twisted in wicked grins. David realized they were surrounded. The shadows circled them, their laughter echoing through the trees. They moved like smoke, their forms changing with every step. Juliet clung to David, her body trembling. What are they?" she whispered. One shadow stopped, its face close to David's. Its eyes were empty, hollow sockets that seemed to pull him in. The shadow grinned, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. "We are the lost, the ones who followed the footprints and never returned." It hissed, its voice cold and empty. David's heart pounded. You were once like us," The shadow's smile widened. Yes, once. But now, we are nothing but echoes. David backed away, his legs shaking. Then how do we live? The shadows laughed, their voices chilling. Find the twisted one, or join us forever. The footprints led to a crooked bridge made of old, twisted vines. It swayed over a deep, dark chasm where shadows danced below. David hesitated. The bridge looked like it could fall apart any moment. But the footprints continued across, and he knew they had to follow. Come on, Juliet. We can do this, he said, forcing courage into his voice. Juliet's eyes were wide with fear. What if it breaks? David took her hand. I won't let you fall. They stepped onto the bridge. It creaked and groaned, the vines twisting under their weight. Halfway across, a cold wind howled from below, carrying the echoes of laughter. The bridge swayed wildly, and Juliet screamed, clinging to David. The shadows below reached up with twisted fingers, trying to grab them. Don't look down! David shouted as they ran across, just as the bridge began to crumble behind them. They reached the other side, panting and shaken. Before them lay a valley filled with shoes, hundreds of them. Old sandals, tattered boots, tiny slippers, all scattered like fallen leaves. Juliet's eyes widened. Whose shoes are these? She asked. David swallowed hard, his mouth dry. The lost ones, the ones who never returned. As they walked through the valley, the shoes seemed to whisper. Faint, sorrowful voices murmured from the shadows. Lost, forgotten, never found. David felt his chest tighten. He noticed the shoes were old, worn out, as if they had been there for ages. Then, he saw them, his own sandals, lying at the center of the valley. But as he ran to grab them, they moved, sliding away as if pulled by invisible hands. The laughter echoed again, mocking him. The twisted one was near. The air grew colder, and the shadows danced around the valley. From the darkness, the twisted one emerged, its body bent and crooked, moving awkwardly as if its legs were twisted in pain. It wore David's sandals, its bony feet bending unnaturally in them. You want your shoes back? It mocked, its voice high and echoing. Then catch me. With a cackle, the twisted one hobbled away, its twisted footprints marking the ground. David ran after it, his heart pounding. Wait. Give me back my sandals. Juliet followed closely, tears streaming down her face. The creature was fast, despite its crooked legs, and it moved with a strange, jerking rhythm. It led them through narrow paths, under hanging vines, and around twisted trees. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows laughing as they ran. The twisted one led them into a maze of tall, winding hedges. The walls were high, covered in sharp thorns that seemed to move, reaching out like claws. Which way did it go? Juliet asked, panic in her voice. David looked around, but the creature had vanished. Only its twisted footprints remained, splitting into multiple paths. It's trying to confuse us, he realized. They chose a path and ran, but the maze twisted and turned, looping back on itself. The shadows whispered, lost, lost, forever lost. The walls moved, shifting each time they looked away, trapping them. David felt his hope fading. We're stuck, Juliet sobbed, hugging him tightly. Then, a familiar call echoed above them. The talking crow landed on the hedge, its eyes gleaming. Follow the truth, not the footprints, it croaked before flying off. David's eyes widened. The footprints were lies. David wiped his tears, determination filling his heart. We won't follow the footprints. We'll trust our own path. Juliet looked at him, confused but hopeful. They ignored the twisted footprints and walked through the maze, listening to their instincts. The whispers grew louder, angry and harsh. Foolish children, don't stray from the path. But David knew the voices were lies. They followed their own path, turning away from the footprints even when they seemed to lead to an exit. The maze fought back, the walls closing in, the thorns scratching at their clothes. But David held Juliet's hand tightly, guiding her forward. Finally, the walls began to thin, the thorns retreating. A light appeared ahead, and they burst out of the maze, finding themselves in a clearing. The Twisted One stood there, its eyes burning with anger. It wasn't done playing its games. The Twisted One hissed, its body twisting and contorting. It threw David's sandals on the ground, taunting him. "You want them? Come and take them." David stepped forward, his hands trembling but his eyes fierce. "You tricked us, played with us, but we are not afraid of you." Juliet stood beside him, her fear replaced by courage. The Twisted One's face twisted with rage. It lunged at them, its crooked limbs reaching out like claws. David grabbed a stick and swung it, but the creature dodged, laughing mockingly. It moved like smoke, shifting and twisting, its body bending in impossible ways. But David noticed something: it was avoiding the light. The shadows were its power. "Juliet, the light!" he shouted. They ran to the edge of the clearing, where the sunlight was strongest. The creature screamed, shrinking back. It was powerless in the light. David and Juliet stood in the golden sunlight, watching as the Twisted One writhed in pain, its body flickering like a dying flame. "It's afraid of the light," Juliet exclaimed, her eyes wide with realization. David gripped her hand tighter. "That's why it stayed in the shadows. We can defeat it." The Twisted One hissed, its twisted face filled with fury. It lunged at them, but the sunlight stopped it, burning its crooked limbs. It howled, its voice echoing through the forest, shaking the trees. The shadows began to pull away, retreating from the light. David took a step forward, his fear gone. "Leave us alone. We are not afraid of you." The creature stumbled back, its form growing weaker, its body unraveling like smoke. It shrieked once more before vanishing into the darkness, its twisted footprints fading away. The moment the Twisted One disappeared, the valley grew silent. The shadows retreated, and the air felt lighter. David looked down and saw his sandals lying at his feet, perfectly untouched. He picked them up, his hands shaking. They are back," he whispered, his voice filled with relief. Juliet's face lit up with joy. "We did it. We beat the Twisted One." David hugged his sandals close, grateful to have them back. But as he looked around the valley, he saw the other shoes, hundreds of them, left behind by those who were lost forever. A cold sadness filled his heart. "These people, they never made it out," he whispered. Juliet nodded, tears in her eyes. "But we did. We escaped the curse." David took her hand, his grip firm. "Then let's go home. And never leave our shoes outside again." David and Juliet followed the path out of the valley, leaving the maze and the shadows behind. The forest seemed brighter now, the trees no longer bending in wicked shapes. Sunlight streamed through the branches, guiding them home. Juliet sighed in relief. "I never thought we would get out." David smiled. "We did because we were together." The talking crow appeared once more, cawing from a branch above. "Clever children, you followed the truth." David looked up, his eyes grateful. "Thank you for helping us." The crow tilted its head, its eyes sparkling. "Beware of the night, and the things that walk in shadows." With that, it flew away, its wings shining in the sunlight. David and Juliet walked on, their steps growing lighter, the exit to the forest just ahead. They were almost home, almost safe. The village appeared in the distance, the familiar huts and paths filling them with relief. As they walked through the gate, Grandmother Sophia stood waiting, her eyes wise and knowing. "You went after your shoes," she said, her voice calm. David hung his head. "I didn't listen. I didn't believe your warning." Grandmother placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm. "The spirits play with those who are careless. But you were brave, and you found your way back." Juliet hugged Grandmother tightly, tears streaming down her face. "We were so scared, but David was strong." Grandmother smiled, her eyes proud. "Courage is born from fear." She looked at the sandals in David's hands. "Never leave them outside again. The twisted one waits for the careless." David nodded, his heart filled with understanding. That night, he placed his sandals safely inside, far from the shadows. And as the moon rose high, the whispers faded, leaving the night still and peaceful once more. The lesson was clear. In Amaya village, no one ever left their shoes outside at night again. And if you listened closely on quiet nights, you could still hear the faint echoes of laughter, lost in the shadows.